Exactly speaking, we have 88 languages in Ethiopia, out of which 44 are being used as the medium of instruction, especially in primary schools. So 50% of Ethiopian languages are now being used as medium of instruction for primary education. Regarding our education system, we have pre-primary for 3 years. We have primary education of 8 years. We have 2 cycles. First cycle of primary education and second cycle of primary education. Both of them are 4 years each. Secondary education is also 4 years. So we have 2 cycles. So the first cycle is grade 9 and 10, and the second cycle is preparatory schools. So I think it is clearly spelled out in our education and training policies that primary education should be given in mother tongue languages. So when I say primary, I mean from grade 1 to 8, including pre-primary level. Yeah. So this is what the policy dictates. And secondary education and higher learning institutions are offered in English. So English will be used as a medium of instruction from secondary schools. And we also use English as a subject. So the policy dictates that English should be used as a subject from grade 1 upwards. But you know, despite the policy, some regions have early transition to English as a medium of instruction. So we have 3 different scenarios. I can put it as a scenario. So the first one is some regions, especially in the southern part of Ethiopia, they switch to English in grade 5. So these are early transitors. Some regions switch to English in grade 7, and we have 2 big regions switch in grade 9, so after 8 years of primary education. So I think there is disparity between the regions regarding the use of English as a medium of instruction. But on the whole, you know, whether we have early transitors or late transitors, the status of English or the level of English is very, very low. Not only English, even the reading, I think a study was conducted by RTI of USA that no matter when you transit to English, the reading ability of our students, especially of primary education, even in the mother tongue, becomes one of the lowest in Africa. So I think this is the situation that we are in. But what I can say is the level of English of teachers is very low. The level of reading capacity of students, especially in their mother tongue, remains low. So I think this is what I have to say, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
मैं कार्ड में रिकॉर्ड कर रहा हूँ तो फिर मैं वाइड रखूँगा फिर वही.
Thank you very much, Solomon. You kept to less than 10 minutes, which is really nice, because then we'll have more time for discussing. Okay, the next person that I'd like to introduce to you is Mr. Pema Wangdi from Bhutan, and he's the officiating secretary of Dzongkha Development Commission. Dzongkha is the national language of Bhutan, I just learned. It's a governmental organization, not the Ministry of Education, but a separate organization. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. My real job is I work as a researcher in the Dzongkha Development Commission. Dzongkha, as Carol just mentioned, is the national language of Bhutan. In the last year, our secretary of this commission retired, and until the new one is appointed, I'm officiating. So I'm not full-fledged. I'm just a substitute for him. Anyway, I would like to, there is nothing prepared, so I will just introduce briefly whatever comes to my mind. First, to begin with the language constellation of Bhutan. Bhutan, as you might know, is a very small country. The population is less than 1 million. Exactly, it is about 700,000 people. And within this small population, there are 19 different languages. So it is linguistically a rich country. And these 19 languages belong to only 2 separate language families. 18 of them belong to the Tibeto-Burman subgroup of the Sino-Tibetan language family, and only 1, which is a Nepali Bahasa, which is spoken in the southern part of Bhutan, belongs to Indo-Aryan language family. And national language is Dzongkha. The reason why Dzongkha was chosen as a national language is because this is the only language which has writing tradition. And all other languages, apart from Nepali, are not written in Bhutan. So Dzongkha apparently was the obvious choice as a national language. And the language policy of Bhutan is briefly enshrined in the Constitution of Bhutan. One of the sections in articles enshrines that Dzongkha is the national language of Bhutan. And then in another section of another article stipulates that language and literature are to be preserved and promoted. So I particularly feel that this is a sound language policy because it provides a clear framework to develop and promote national language on the one hand, and also to preserve and promote other languages of Bhutan on the other hand. In the school education system, English is the main medium of instruction in Bhutan. And Dzongkha, our national language, is only taught as a language subject at the moment. And as a matter of fact, it plays a very limited role, even the national language. And although we have the official policy to preserve and promote other languages of Bhutan, but the concept of mother tongue-based multilingual education is very, very new in Bhutan. And I look forward, this conference has been an eye-opening one for me. I'll be taking back a lot of information, and I really look forward that I will have to create awareness back home and see what we can make progression in it. Yes. As I said, English is the main medium of instruction, and Dzongkha, our national language, is only taught as a language subject at the moment. And at one time, because Dzongkha as a written language is quite new. It was written only in 1971, and about 3 decades, in my opinion, is an extremely short period in the evolution of language development. Although we have the official policy to document and preserve the other languages of Bhutan, but honestly, we have not been able to do much so far. But we do collaborate with foreign individual researchers and students, people who are registered for this linguistic PhD courses. They choose Bhutanese languages, so we support them. And just to give the brief background of the other languages of Bhutan, many languages of Bhutan would fall under the category of endangered languages. Just to compare, although there are several definitions of language endangerment, generally linguists say that a language is safe if it is believed, if there is a possibility that children will speak them in next 100 years. And a language is not safe, is threatened with extinction if the children will not speak them in 100 years. And technically we call it moribund. A language is a moribund if the children are not speaking them now. So going by this definition, almost all the languages of Bhutan, apart from the national language and two others, the Nepali and another language spoken in the eastern part of Bhutan called Tsangla, apart from these three, all the languages of Bhutan would fall under the category of endangered languages. And three of them are critically endangered. And as Osama mentioned in the morning inauguration session, one of the dialects of these endangered languages, called Olekha, has got only one living speaker. And she is over 86 now. And when she dies, that language dies together. So from this workshop, we really look forward to take home a lot of information, ideas on the preservation of other languages. I cannot really say just now whether multilingual, mother tongue-based multilingual education would be feasible in Bhutan because, as I said, almost all the languages are not written, and I cannot imagine teaching, introducing mother tongue-based education or in unwritten languages, because developing teaching resources would be a serious challenge at the beginning. Even if we utilize the existing script, although it can be written, used to write other languages, but I still see a lot of challenges because languages differ. Languages differ in their sound systems, in phonology, the grammar, and one script, although it can be used to write another language quite efficiently, may not necessarily serve the same degree of purpose for another language. So we have a lot of challenges, but still I look forward to do something, taking ideas from this conference. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So our third speaker's name is Mr. Harun Mohammed. He's the Director for Teacher Professional Development in the Department for Basic Education, the equivalent of Ministry of Education, but in South Africa. Thank you. And he has very quickly prepared some slides for us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. I'm hoping my few slides are on, but what I wanted to do is follow the prompt that was given of celebration and problematization. And you'll see as I go along, South Africa is a very interesting case of things to celebrate, but also a lot of challenges to overcome. But let me begin with a personal account, because I think the personal is the political. I schooled from mid-60s through to mid-70s. At the moment, English is my strongest language. I grew up in a home in which I learned to speak Gujarati. I have a working understanding of a little bit of Urdu, and I was taught mechanical Arabic because I had to learn the Quran. As we grew up in South Africa, all the African languages were stigmatized and marginalized. So I grew up in that generation, and I would guess that my African counterparts who schooled in that system would have experienced what I experienced. As youth in the area that we grew up, we recognized that there was something wrong with the dispensation. And so some of us made the attempt to learn African languages. I started learning isiZulu and isiXhosa, isiZulu being the largest spoken language in the country, isiXhosa being the second. But my attempts have not been successful. So I'm just giving an illustration of the issues from a very personal point. I would have loved to have been a fluent speaker of most of the African languages, but at least one, and I'm not. So, just a quick overview, because we were asked to do this. There's about 55 million people in South Africa, and I'm not sure if all my figures are correct, but I'm glad that there are South African colleagues here who correct me as we go along. 45 million, the majority of South Africans are indigenous African, and 9 of our official languages come from that portion of the population, but there are a number of dialects and forms of African languages which are not recognized as official. We have about 6 million people of European descent who mainly speak Afrikaans. I'll share the figures with you just now. English is the second most widely spoken language, but we have Portuguese, Italian, French, German, Russian. In fact, almost all the European languages which are minorities in South Africa. There's about 2 million people of Indian descent, people like myself. The strongest representation is Tamil, followed by Telugu, Gujarati, Hindi, Urdu, and Arabic. And then 4 million people of mixed descent who speak mainly Afrikaans, but also English, and there may be people who speak some of the minority European languages. So I'm hoping that's clear enough. That's the map of South Africa, and the representation of the usage of the languages is done alphabetically, but you'll see isiZulu is the largest spoken. In fact, I've got another slide which shows that more carefully. So there's a representation of the usage of the language. English standing at just below 10%. This was a 2009 graphic that I managed to get hold of, so it should be around 10%. Afrikaans is higher, and then you've got Zulu and isiXhosa. But the problem is the majority of South African learners have to be instructed in and examined in English. So can you see the inversion, the challenge that we've got? And so, not surprisingly, if I can just maybe go to that one quickly, you'll see I put in South Africa we use 4 principles that drive our system. It's access, quality, equity, and relevance. Now, in terms of access, between 1994 when we had the democratic transition to now, we've moved access from around 60% of learners being in primary school to 100% net enrollment, and about 90% in the secondary school sector. But if you look at our results profile, we perform less well than countries on the African continent who invest less in education. And so, although there's a lot of speculation around this, some of us are of the view that language is at the center of our problems. I've had the opportunity of looking through the national certificate, senior certificate exam scripts, as well as we now do what we call annual national assessments in all the grades. So all the children in the primary school up to grade 9 participate in language and numeracy or mathematics national assessments. And if you look through the scripts, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that the majority of the wrong responses arise from the fact that the children are not understanding the question. And particularly if you look at the maths and science grade 12 or exit examination papers, that's the case. About 70% of our teaching force is black African, whose home language is not English, and whose language proficiency is English language proficiency is quite low. So the celebratory part of our policy is after 1994, our constitution reserves the right of all languages to be given equal weight and use. Children and parents have the right to be taught in the language of choice. But this is where the difficulty comes about. If you look at the profile of South African schools, if I can speak for my own children, for example, although they are mixing with children of different backgrounds, which opportunity we didn't have when we grew up, they still don't have access to African languages. Although the good news is that from next year, we're introducing a policy called Incremental Introduction of African Languages. So every grade 1 classroom in the country that is not offering or using an African language will have to start learning an African language. And we're hoping by 2025, that generation of South Africans will be able to, who do not use an African language, will be able to at least have conversational African language. But it's a struggle. We started this program about 4 years ago, and the initial introduction year was 2014. We're now into 2016, and the difficulty we're having is we don't have enough teachers, we don't have enough textbooks, and we don't have enough materials with which to present the languages. And then because of having to train teachers and having to access the teachers, we were struggling with finding a budget to be able to provide for the policy. So, in a nutshell, the point I'm making is that our constitution and our language and education policy is up to speed with the most progressive policies in the world in terms of multilingualism. But in execution terms, we are falling very far behind precisely because of the issues that I've raised. There's not enough time, in my view, devoted to the policy. There's not enough resources in terms of people and in terms of the materials and textbooks to follow it through. But we're quite excited because what's been very interesting in a number of the surveys, and maybe Zubaida, who's sitting here, she's done more research than I have, but I've been involved in this field for about 20 to 30 years. In almost all the surveys that were done, particularly with black African parents, they choose to send their children to English-speaking schools because, as in the plenary you heard, they see it as or at least our sense is that they see it as the strongest means to economic empowerment. But quite a large number of them are now recognizing that it's actually to their disadvantage because the language is being lost, the heritage is being lost, and so there is an increasing lobby, I'm not sure how strong that lobby is, of children in the middle class segment who are insisting that the schools actually are faithful to the policy of offering the African languages. So a number of what we call previously mainly schools of European descent are actually having to offer African languages because of parental pressure. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
So many interesting issues already coming up. Our final speaker today is Mrs. Maheshi. I'm going to try the pronunciation. You can tell me. Nirasuriya? Yes. Okay. Who is from Sri Lanka and from the Ministry of Education and a specialist in English, if I have that correct? English and foreign languages. Can you just present that yourself? Thank you. Sorry to get it wrong. National languages.
Thank you, Kiri. I am Mahesh Veerasurya, Director of Education, English and Foreign Languages from the Ministry of Education. Sri Lanka has two major languages, which are Sinhala and Tamil. English also widely spoken, and it was the official language in colonial era. After independence, also it was used as the official language, then medium of instruction in education. After 1956, government changed, the policy also changed. Then government decided Sinhala must be the official language because the majority of the country were Sinhalese. Medium of instruction in schools must be Sinhala and Tamil. There were good points and bad points of this issue. The policy has been criticized by many people. There were people for and against. Some socialist researchers pointed out this issue as also one of the major causes for the 30 years ethnic conflict we had to face. But presently, Sinhala, Tamil and English considered as official languages. Considering the language policy in schools, we have three types of schools, which are international schools, private schools, and government schools. In international schools, they use their own systems and exams. Some does British syllabuses and exams as London O-levels and A-levels. Some does American exams. However, the government has nothing to do with them. Most of the private schools do local syllabus in English medium. We have nearly 10,000 government schools. Primary education of these schools in Sinhala or Tamil. Government policy is children must get their primary education in their mother tongue. As the UNESCO representative in the morning pointed out, there are issues in this context, and most of the researchers are going on. But in our context, we see the quality of education is much higher in government schools than other international and private schools, though there are some issues, problems in the government schools. And also, after grade 6, that means after the primary cycle, we have bilingual education, which we teach some selected subjects in English, such as math, science, environmental studies. Because higher education or university education, engineering, medicine, science streams are in English medium, so this helps students who hope to do their further education in such streams. If we consider English, it is one of the major subjects in our school syllabi. This is our language policy in brief. When we consider our mother tongue, Sinhala and Tamil, our literary rate is around 97%. Most people in the country can read and write. As many South Asian countries, we have problems with English education because lack of teachers, resources, mostly in rural areas. As the ministry, we try to find solutions, try to recruiting teachers, especially for these remote areas. We are struggling with the problems and hope for the best.
Thanks. I'm so impressed. Everyone kept it to less than 10 minutes, so we have a lot of time for discussion. And I'm going to take the liberty of talking just a couple of minutes about some issues that I think have come up throughout your presentations that people might want to ask about, as well as your own questions. One of the points that I think was made pretty clearly is that just changing the medium of instruction might not address all of the issues in education. I think that comes through pretty clearly, although we know that it could allow some good things to happen if we're talking about learners using learners' own languages in school. There's also a very interesting point that was raised by our representative of Bhutan, the idea of which languages are written or exist in standardized written form, the ease in usage or bringing them into the education system. Often I find that I don't know the situation in Bhutan, but often I find that that is an excuse that's not actually true. That many languages do exist in written form, there's just not a lot of materials used yet due to under-resourcing and under-appreciation of what exists. Another point I think that comes up, especially when we think about South Africa's very interesting language policy, not only the idea that learners should have a chance to use their home languages, but they should also learn another South African language. That is also, I believe, a factor in Ethiopia with Amharic, a national language, being taught as a second language, as a subject in the school system. So that's a consideration that could help with some of the unity or the idea of creating a national feeling with using diverse languages, learning each other's languages. One thing that it seems to underlie your presentations but didn't necessarily come up as a term is power issues, right? And the differences even between, we often talk about the difference between a dominant language or an international or official language and other national languages, but what we don't always talk about is dominance between non-dominant languages. Which languages have more power and why? It might be political reasons, or it might be reasons of which languages were chosen earlier to have a special status. And finally, I thought the policy-practice divide came through pretty clearly in the presentations, that we feel that children should have a right, or families should have a right to, that their children should be able to learn in their own languages, or even that the families should be able to choose. But are they well aware of what they're choosing as Dr. Mohanty mentioned this morning, do parents really know what they're choosing when they might choose to use a dominant language over non-dominant languages or over multilingual education? I think I'll leave it there, and then we'll just take questions and answers. Maybe we can take a few questions, and then members of the panel can choose to address them or not. Shall we do that? Do we need someone who can run around with a microphone? There's a couple microphones here. The panelists will need them. People are pondering their questions, or it could be comments also. Birgit?
Hello. Is this working? You here? Yeah. I'm Birgit Rocketne, University of Oslo, Norway. I've had a number of students from Sri Lanka, and my question is to a representative from Sri Lanka. And also, I knew Rana Vera, who was the head of the Curriculum Development Center years ago in Sri Lanka, but he's dead now. But I have quoted him extensively when he wrote about when Sri Lanka went from using English as language of instruction to using Tamil and Sinhala. And he wrote that what was so fantastic about that was exactly when it came to science and technology, that now the science came to the people. They could understand the science and maths because it came in their own languages. And one of my students from Sri Lanka who made a PhD out of the change when Sri Lanka tried to reintroduce English in science and maths, and according to him, that didn't work. So I was a bit surprised to hear what you said about that. Now, his thesis about 6 years ago. There might have been a change after that, but it just contradicts what he had found out in his big study of that this didn't work when it came to science and maths, that it was much better to have the teaching done in Sinhala and Tamil. So, like, comment on that.
Maybe we could do that, yes. Could I just mention that we're putting all of our panelists on the spot here. They may not be experts in exactly what your questions address, but of course we'll give them an opportunity to express opinions or whatever they know from their own backgrounds and specializations, and understanding that we're... Yeah. Do you want the question a little bit... Quick and clear question.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, we just need to clarify that question. Can we give the microphone back to Birgit, please? Sorry, just a moment.
No, my question was, has there been a change the last 6 years? Because what he found out was that this didn't work, of reintroducing English, and that it was much better in the schools that he had looked at, the secondary schools, where they had Tamil and Sinhala, but reintroducing English didn't work. But now I thought you were saying that now you were teaching in Sinhala and no, in English, in science and maths.
Can you just, Kandi, can you answer that question? Yeah. I think.
Great.
Should I sit down and answer or stand up and answer?
Okay. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, I am Kandipan from Sri Lanka. I am working for GSS. It's a bilateral agency between Sri Lanka and Germany. We are doing a project also in second national language. So come back to your questions. When we had our conference 2011, we touched that subject. I think absolutely you are touching the right point. Though the government introduced that medium of instruction to learn subjects in A level, advanced level, after the, I don't know, others can understand A level. After passing your secondary, higher level, you can switch into English as a medium of instruction, but it somehow, we face a lot of problems. You are right. So that's what earlier parents had some sort of expectation their children, when they learn the advanced level in the English language, they can go for global opportunities. But it was somehow failed, right? So now even there is a one study research in the 2011 book, the Blue Color book. So if you want, you can go through it. So I agree with your point. So medium of instruction should be in mother tongue, right? So rather than switching to English.
Thank you.
Thank you to the panel. My name is Vyogas Vnomlom from South Africa, Cape Town. I'm just interested to get more information on the issue of language in Ethiopia. I was just interested in your presentation with regard to the issue of English and these other languages which are also used in education, the 44 languages, which I thought, wow, it's really incredible to have such a big number of languages in use in education. My question, given my background in South Africa, is that some parents, let me say not most, would take their children for English medium schools from as early as grade R. That is before grade 1. So I would like to know, in the case of Ethiopia, do you have such cases where learners would go to school and learn through the medium, not English as a subject, through the medium of English from grade 1? And in that case, when are they introduced to other languages? At what level would those students or those learners be introduced to other languages other than English? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Shall I?
Yeah, I think because there's country specific, we might as well ask and answer.
Okay, thank you very much. So as I said earlier, almost 50% of our languages are now being used as medium of instruction from grade 1 to grade 8 for many regions. But some regions, have early transition to English in grade 5 or in grade 7, despite the policy. Yeah, regarding pre-primary, honestly speaking, pre-primary has always been administered by the private sector, and pre-primary education is mostly given in English. Yeah, especially pre-primary education are mainly found in the cities, like Addis Ababa. So students, honestly speaking, start learning in grade 1. So the majority of Ethiopian students, so they start in grade 1. But in pre-primary, it is English, which is a major one. But this is the case of only big cities. But the policy clearly states that nationality languages, local languages, or mother tongue should be used as a medium of instruction from grade 1 up to grade 8. And some regions switch for some political reasons. So I think there is animosity between the education and the government system. So it is the government system that imposes the transition to English. For example, in the southern part of Ethiopia, no decision has been made by researchers or academicians or education personnel regarding switching to English. So if I have correctly got your question. Yeah.
Okay, to be continued after the session. Next question.
Thank you very much. I'm Bonnie Norton. I'm at the University of British Columbia in Canada, but I've done a lot of work for many years in Africa, and I'm the research advisor on the African Storybook Project. So I have a question and perhaps a challenge for all of you, since you all represent policymakers. And one of the things that we find in the research I've done in many parts of Africa is that teachers are terrified of policy. And as schools are transitioning, most of them are transitioning from mother tongue to English, teachers are terrified of using the mother tongue as a resource in their teaching for fear that they are actually contravening policy. And yet we all know how important it is to have a flexible approach to policy, because kids need to learn and they need to draw on the mother tongue for learning purposes. So I guess my challenge to you, or my question to all of you is, how are you ensuring, or are you ensuring, that policy is taken as flexibly as possible within schools so that teachers are not terrified to use the mother tongue as a resource as they transition to official languages?
Great question. Maybe we better take a few answers. Do you want to just go 1, 2, 3, 4? Little response to that question about policy.
Yeah, but I agree to you sometimes. Yeah, but we need to, yes. Yeah, we need to do research, yes. But the politics, especially in, I think, South Asian countries, the politicians, they have their own policies. Sometimes the very pathetic thing is the policy change to government. So I think, yes, I agree to you, and we need to do research. And what is the best policy in the context of social, cultural, in the sense of the country.
Yeah, in our case, because of the realities, there are lots of instances of automatic code switching. So a teacher who's not proficient in English language will use the vernacular language to be able to teach. But as I indicated, our results are not matching the goals of the country. So we've got something I didn't mention in my presentation is that although the majority of South African teachers have competence in home language, their own language, because of the system of production, most of them are not qualified in those languages. So, we've got that challenge, but one would support, my response is flexibility is occurring whether we like it or not as policymakers. But perhaps the solution or suggested solution to the issues is that, as the plenary presentation raised the issue of what is the kind of English that we need to use to take forward, noting that English has had its colonial and disempowering effect historically. My own sense is that we need to democratize English. So the English should be familiar to the users of the English, and that should include possibilities of the flexibility that you're suggesting. But the implications of that is enormous amount of expert structured material development that would need to happen, and then teacher training and teacher professional development processes would have to be accompanyingly reorganized.
That's okay. There, it's okay.
Yeah. The children in Bhutan grow up at least trilingual, their mother tongue, then the national language Dzongkha, and English. Because quite early on, they have been exposed to English, because, as I said, English is the main medium of instruction in the schools. Then I forgot to mention in my introduction, then we have a fourth language. It's a classical equivalent to Sanskrit kind of language, which is used in Dharma, the religion, and as a language of liturgy. So not many students have competency of that language, but still it is taught in the school. Some textbooks are still in that language, called Cheke, we call Cheke, literally the language of Dharma. Honestly, in Bhutan, the need for mother tongue-based education was not felt so far, precisely because the languages of Bhutan are closely related, although not completely mutually intelligible. But apart from this language, Nepali Bahasa, which belongs to another language family, all other languages of Bhutan belong to the same language family, and they are closely related. And because of that, children have almost equal competency of that national language. So that way, as I said, the concept of mother tongue education in Bhutan is almost foreign, and there was no need felt so far. But from here on, I'm not sure what will happen. But there are two organizations, both are government. The one is the Dzongkha Development Commission, where I work, and the other is the Ministry of Education, and they are independent of each other. My organization looks after the corpus planning of the national language. We write grammar, we write dictionaries, bilingual dictionaries, and language reference materials. And like in other countries, the Ministry of Education takes care of acquisition planning, like enabling the students to acquire competency in national language and English. And although we work in close collaboration, but our mandates are different. So that way, whether to include this mother tongue-based education in Bhutan is for the Ministry of Education to consider. But from our organization, we would be very happy to collaborate, and I agree that children learn better if they are taught in their mother tongues in the early stage of education, and also they make better transition. Now I'm fully aware. And from our side, our organization, we will be conducting same kind of works, linguistic works that we do on national language, on other languages of Bhutan from now on, although we are limited by resources, manpower, but still from now on, we would be happy to carry out the same kind of language documentation, research on other languages as we do for the national language. Thank you.
Okay, just I would like to say a few words regarding your question. Yeah, like Bhutan, Ethiopia is also follows a multilingual education system. We have Amharic as a lingua franca. Amharic is a national language of the federal language of Ethiopia, and it is used as a lingua franca for many children. And Amharic is given also as a subject, apart from English, as a subject in non-Amharic speaking regions. In Ethiopia, it is used as a second language. So many children have the opportunity to learn, to know at least 2 Ethiopian languages and one foreign language, English. Regarding flexibility, yes, it is true that even if the policy dictates that English should be used as a medium of instruction in secondary schools, teachers don't have adequate English. Teachers don't have, the competence to use English freely in the classroom. So I think they resort to using their mother tongue. But the problem in Ethiopia is even mother tongue teachers are not well trained. So you become a teacher if you are, the speaker of that language. So without receiving, the necessary training as a teacher. Especially this applies to languages that are recently introduced in our education system as medium of instruction. So this is the problem that we are facing. But I think the good point is it is good to introduce, our national language as much as possible. So far we have used 50% of our language as medium of instruction. I think in the next few years, this number will grow, will increase, despite some challenges regarding training of teachers in the language. I think languages are like flowers and they can, bloom, and this is what I feel, yeah? Thank you very much.
We hope the policy blooms as well. Another question? Looks like we have time for at least one more.
Can I ask a question? We have time? Good afternoon. This is Neena Jha from Digital Empowerment Foundation. I do hope the question is relevant. I just wanted to know within the framework, the policy framework, because we have representatives from the government here, I would like to know if we have used or we have leveraged technology as an enabler for developing tools, applications for indigenous languages in these countries that we just had presentations from. Thank you.
If you don't have anything to say, it's fine.
Yeah, interestingly, in South Africa, we've just completed something called Operation Pakisa. Pakisa is I think it's a Sepedi word, meaning big fast. We've completed a plan for using ICT to enhance teaching and learning, and some of the papers that were presented were showing that we will be able to present African languages in a much quicker way if we use the digital media.
And you also use many of your South African languages in mobile telephones and other, yeah. Okay, sorry, just had to put in an extra word for South Africa. Anybody else? IT? It was a good question. Looks like we need to learn more too.
We have identified information technology as one of our planning frameworks that we can promote national language through modern technology. As a written language, our national language is very young, very new. It was, we have started writing it since 1971, although 3 decades, but more than 3 decades, 4 decades, but still in the process of language development, it is relatively less time, but still now we have started developing a parser. We have just started, but we are not sure how on we will go, but we have also started developing optical character recognition and text-to-speech and speech-to-text, but we have just started. And this is a colossal kind of work. We need a huge database, language corpus. We need to analyze, do parts of speech tagging, and then come up with the formula with all the grammatical rules. But we have just started for the national language. And if this goes well with the national language, then we can use the same idea and apply it to other languages of Bhutan. Thank you.
I'm afraid we have to end at this point. Is that true?
Some mementos for the guests.
Are they okay? We have some gifts to present. I'd like to thank you all for coming and for your good questions, and encourage you to continue the dialogue now that you know who our panelists are, to approach them during breaks and other times if you would like more information or to discuss these issues further. Thanks a lot to all of you for coming and for participating. And thank you very much to our panelists for your brave presentations and representation of your countries and what's happening in languages and education. Thank you all very much. It looks like what we have are some very nice photos of the presenters. So thank you for those. Yeah, very fast. So I think that's yours, Solomon. Unless it's for me to put up on my wall for. And I think this looks like it's from your presentation. And very nice photos here. Very professional.
Oh, thank you.
Hey.
Thank you.
You look like an intellectual. I look confused. Should we be showing? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks so much. It's great, and it's great that you called on your colleague. That's fine. Yeah.
I don't know how to.
Yeah, it's fine. How can you know? Yes, I do. And I'll go. Great. Yeah, thank you. And thanks so much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. That was a nice chairmanship.
Yes.
You know, I actually forgot about 4 things that I should have said.
Yes.